It was 80 years ago, in the Nazi-occupied USSR.
The entire village was set on fire. They burned everything.
From 1941 to 1945, Hitler's troops and their European allies committed countless crimes against civilians.
They threw us out and set fire to everything. They killed my father. We were left alone.
That's where they burned them alive.
Mass crimes on an unimaginable scale.
These were reprisal units. They spared nothing. Among the Germans' allies, often forgotten, were Frenchmen.
They belonged to the LVF, the Legion of French Volunteers Against Bolshevism. They too took part in the crimes, and their story has never been told on television. One of them, this man on the right, is named Ugo Ramacciotti. A volunteer in 1941, he kept a diary and filmed with his own camera. Documents discovered by chance and entrusted to us by his family. It is through his eyes, his troubled impressions, that we will tell their story. His testimony, exceptional and unprecedented, sheds light on the atrocities committed against ordinary civilians in the name of defending civilization. These soldiers belonged to Hitler's army, and they were French. All volunteers, they swore allegiance to the Führer and wore the enemy's uniform. A tricolor patch sewn on the right sleeve. While France was occupied by Nazi Germany, they were sent to the Eastern Front and formed the 638th Regiment of the Wehrmacht. To protect Europe from communism, they claimed. For a long time, they were hastily dismissed as insignificant soldiers. Poorly trained, poorly led. Their numbers are considered negligible over the course of the war. A small contingent compared to other European volunteers. Far from the 800,000 Russians and 250,000 Ukrainians recruited locally, or the 47,000 Spaniards sent by Franco. The story of these Frenchmen began in the summer of 1941, during Operation Barbarossa, when Hitler launched his army, 3.5 million soldiers, to invade the USSR. A month after the attack began, collaborationist parties in Paris gathered at the Vélodrome d'Hiver to demand France's participation in the offensive.
Let's be clear. If France wants to remain a global European power, if France wants to remain worthy of Europe, it must fight alongside it against Bolshevism. There is no other way for us.
They were never part of the French army. The LVF was a private military association, organized under the 1901 law, supported by the German embassy, Pierre Laval and Marshal Pétain. You hold a share of our military honor, the head of state told them from Vichy. Only half of the candidates were accepted. Among them, adventurers, petty thugs too. Some would triple their salary. Ambitious men. There were also ideologues called idealists at the time, like Jacques Doriot, the leader of the PPF, the one who spoke at the podium. In the eyes of French public opinion, they were traitors. It was under the cover of night, almost in secret, that the first contingent left the LVF barracks in Versailles to go fight in Russia. Here they are, on their way to the east, filmed with Ugo Ramaccioti's camera. On the right. We are leaving to contribute to the victory of National Socialist Europe, writes the amateur cameraman. Assigned as medics to the 1st Battalion of the LVF, they have no idea they will soon be drawn into the repression of the local population. Within his own family, his commitment is not understood. And it remains so 80 years later, when we meet his son Hugues in Paris, who was 7 years old at the time. With him, we watched his father's films and read his letters, who died on the front in 1944.
Well, here's the card he wrote me 2 months before he died. Be a proud, courageous, strong and honest man. Abhor lies. By doing so, you will prepare yourself to one day be an upright man. I'm counting on you. I kiss you warmly. My little Hugues, see you soon. You know, Marshal Pétain said, work, family, homeland. I wish my dad had prioritized family over his ideals. But what can you do?
Ugo Ramacciotti, an atypical soldier in the LVF, full of contradictions. He was born in 1908 into an Italian family and spent his childhood in Egypt, raised in a Catholic school. Then he came to Paris to study at HEC and married a French woman, Anne, a small business owner in the coffee industry. He considered himself more French than the French themselves.
France for him was everything. You have to imagine the disappointment, the catastrophe, when France lost the war against Germany.
Together, the father and son witnessed the Germans entering Paris in 1940.
While trying to cross Avenue Foch, we saw the German troops marching. I couldn't help but stick out my tongue at them. And my father scolded me, saying we'd get in trouble. But he felt the same as I did. It was awful for him to see that.
Inexplicably, he would switch to the German side.
They were magnificent. They were impressive. They gave the impression of immense strength. Huge. So maybe my father changed his mind because of that.
In reality, this fervent Christian was above all an anti-communist.
My father constantly talked about the anti-Bolshevik crusade. That was his big idea, the word crusade, which refers to a Christian war. For him, Soviet Russia was the devil. It was the monster to be destroyed. He was, above all, very Catholic. Soviet Russia was distinctly anti-Catholic. That's how he saw it, at least.
In December 1941, 3 months after his enlistment, Ramacciotti participated with the LVF in the Battle of Moscow, in -40-degree weather. A failure for Hitler's troops. And especially for these Frenchmen who approached the Russian capital but failed to break through.
He was convinced the war would be won in 2 months, that the Germans would defeat the USSR as they had defeated France. And in January 1942, he writes in his notebooks, we were stopped by the winter. In the spring, the fighting will resume. In 2 months, it's over.
But in the spring of 1942, nothing is over. On the contrary. And for the LVF, a new battle begins. Nothing like conventional warfare anymore. With his comrades, Ugo Ramacciotti is sent 200 kilometers behind the front. To Belarus, a Soviet republic conquered a year earlier by Hitler's armies. He settles in several villages, including Morovo, on the banks of the Berezina, not far from where Napoleon and his Grande Armée passed during the retreat from Russia in 1812. It's here, 2,000 kilometers from France, that everything will spiral out of control. The LVF's mission is to combat Soviet partisans, hiding in the forests around the village. Curiously, upon their arrival, the French are rather well received.
We are staying with locals. Many children and peasant women bring us strawberries and blueberries in exchange for bread or soap. I admire the beauty of their eyes with long lashes and the red and white complexion of their faces. Our hostess tells us that, a few days earlier, the partisans killed her brother after stealing a cow.
Since they took to the forests, the partisans have not hesitated to requisition food from the village. In Morovo, 80 years after the events, we meet Anna Petrovna, 12 years old at the time. For her, the arrival of the French in 1942 came at just the right time.
The partisans had taken pigs and sheep from us. They had to feed themselves in the forest. That was before the French arrived. As a little girl, I had to lie against the sheep. We hid from the partisans so they wouldn't take it. We slaughtered it ourselves to eat it. The French were kind. Too kind. If they could always be here, it would be nice.
A well-understood interest that even touches some partisan families. In the neighboring village of Chernevichi, Irina Nikolaevna, though the daughter of resistance fighters, seems to appreciate some of the occupying soldiers.
Sometimes they brought food, their leftovers, and we talked. Peaceful relations, temporarily. What else can I say? In Bosovo, there was a German doctor. My older brother took my younger brother to him because he had an infection on his arm. They put a bandage and ointment on it, and the arm healed quickly.
The French took the girls for walks. Some spoke Russian. In the evenings, we danced. We rushed to these parties. They gave us harmonicas. It was nice. Almost a party every evening.
For the LVF soldiers, the good life.
They seemed like human beings, normal, like us. But fascists are fascists, and soldiers are soldiers.
Peaceful in most of the villages where they settle, the French soldiers will soon commit their first atrocities during patrols in the surrounding areas. From the moment they arrived, the German command tasked them with hunting down armed bands that were multiplying attacks on communication routes, notably the road linking Warsaw to Moscow. Invisible enemies, knowing the terrain and threatening the occupiers at every step. Here they are, those famous partisans. In Belarus, there would be 180,000 of them. These images reached us thanks to cameramen sent by Stalin. For the needs of Soviet propaganda. Authentic images. Perhaps a bit too cheerful, according to the accounts of witnesses we met in the former French zone. One of them is Goretsky Andrei Vitoldovich. He joined the Partisans in the forest at the age of 15.
I took my little cow. I fled to the woods and gave my cow to the partisans. They accepted me. I was in the Bolshevik group. There were nearly 400 of us.
For months, the Partisans were at a disadvantage against the French who controlled the villages.
How did we live? We were starving. We were cold. There were many of us. 400 people, you have to feed them. Hunger, cold, fear, that's all. We went without food, without water. We ate grass, linden leaves, sorrel. We tried to dig in the ground to find potatoes, even rotten ones. I was naked, without shoes. That's how we lived. What I thought, how to survive.
A total commitment sparked by the crimes of German soldiers starting in 1941, during the invasion of the USSR. From Moscow, Stalin called for the uprising of the population.
They want to rob our people to the last drop. Now I ask you to help our Red Army, the fighters and their leaders, to the last drop of blood.
And that's what they did against the French of the LVF.
Planes parachuted weapons. We blew up the railway between Smolyavichi and Jodzina. We had to fight. It was war. We killed. We stripped them to take their clothes. The locals helped us.
Yes, we helped them. My father was a liaison for the Partisans. Everyone was fighting the war for their land, for their children, for the homeland.
The partisans were kind. They protected our homeland to prevent the Germans' victory. The Germans, those fascists, they beat people. Here it was all partisan families. We were all for the partisans.
From the villages they occupy, Ugo Ramacciotti and his comrades intensify their sweep operations. He films with his camera, sending the reels to his wife through military mail. And he recounts it in his diary.
A car just exploded on a mine. We must surprise partisans hiding in a village. We cross through thickets, swamps. I try to look confident, but I realize the danger. 3 times, we find traces of camps that the partisans must have abandoned in a hurry. One of them, taken prisoner, serves as our guide.
Disappointing beginnings. During combined operations with other German army units, they encircle villages considered hostile, where they believe partisans take refuge and feed at night. But it's a failure.
One of the peasants tells us the village was sheltering 200 partisans, but they retreated at 4 a.m. Fate seems to mock us, and I don't understand it. We show up in one place, and the partisans flee. We leave 2 days later, and the partisans return.
It's during one of these failed operations that the situation spirals. Frustrated, the French turn on the livestock.
The number of pigs and poultry slaughtered is unbelievable. All it took was a brief pause for the hunt to begin immediately. What the hell am I doing in this mess?
For Ramacciotti, a shock. Pillage, very common on the Eastern Front, will become widespread in the LVF because the officers supposed to prohibit it are often the first to engage in it.
The captain is utterly foolish. No sense of responsibility. What a bunch of bums. And scoundrels.
Pillage. Theft. And already, the first rapes. A legionnaire recounts. I collapse onto her and take her like that. My boots dripping. Grenades on my belt. My face covered in dust and dried sweat. He justifies himself. This isn't a soldier's war, but a pirate's war. For now in Murowo, the residents continue to support the French, notably Anna Petrovna's family. A support they will pay for dearly.
There were houses over there. Here was our house. And over there, Misha's house, the tractor driver. The partisans burned right here. They came and burned the house. The cows were burned. Maybe because the French were there. The devil knows why.
A population torn apart. Frenchmen threatened, who count their first casualty. We don't know if the person smiling at us wouldn't stab us with the greatest pleasure, writes Ramacciotti in his diary. He continues to film. For his commitment in the war against the USSR, he is awarded the Winter Medal in the East. It will make Hughes happy, he says, not fooled by the honors. He now wishes to return to France, to reunite with his wife and son. But at the end of 1942, with the start of the Battle of Stalingrad, leaves are suspended.
I'm overwhelmed with despair. I think of Hughes, of Anne. I feel like I see her screaming, crying, gesticulating, begging me to turn back.
It didn't match his ideals. He considers that in this LVF, there's a majority of thugs. It was more a gang than an army. For him, it was horrific.
In the fall of 1942, LVF units had already been involved in mass massacres, including of Jews. On October 4th this time, a French patrol falls into an ambush set by partisans. 18 dead.
It had to happen sooner or later. The guys lie on the ground. 2 of them have their fingers cut off, probably for their rings. It seems the wounded were finished off by those bandits.
For Ramacciotti, another shock? The men are overexcited and would easily take revenge on civilians, he says. And he asks the question, will there be a punitive expedition? Since a German decree from May 1941, reprisals against civilians are authorized, and the choice of collective punishment is left to the judgment of officers. He knows no soldier can be prosecuted for actions against the population. Four days after the ambush, the German command launches a reprisal operation led by the SS. These are tough guys who leave little behind them, writes Ramacciotti. For a week, the SS will target villages deemed hostile. A nightmare still raw, 80 years later.
We were especially afraid of those wearing helmets. On those helmets there was a skull with very wide teeth. It looked like a grimace.
Ramacciotti does not participate in the operation, unlike some of his comrades from the 1st Battalion.
They came from that side and burned everything. Everything! The partisans said, "Flee! Don't stay in the houses, flee! The Germans are coming!" But where could we hide? We couldn't do anything! Oh, you're a partisan? Boom! They burned the house.
They lit torches and threw them onto the houses. Everything went up in flames. Over there it was burning. And over there the other houses too. And then here. It was a purification. All those linked to the partisans were murdered.
Mom almost got killed. If she hadn't kissed the German's hand, she would have been killed.
I saw the courtyard was full of soldiers. They asked, "Are the partisans here?" Dad said, "Yes, they came." Someone had denounced Dad because he was handling their weapons. They turned the house upside down, and they hit him on the right cheek with something. He started bleeding, it was pouring out. I ran to the woods. A soldier saw me and laughed. He said, "Little one, little one." I started backing away, he came toward me. He was big, sturdy, with a helmet. He grabbed my leg and threw me into the snow. I tried to escape by crawling.
We didn't even have time to grab our clothes. I was all alone. I was little, only 7 years old. I was afraid of the Germans.
We fled, wherever our feet took us. We were crying, the little ones, me and my brother. It was cold, minus 40 degrees. We had nothing to live on. My brother lit a fire. It warmed us up. We arranged pine branches and sat on them. We spent the whole winter in the woods next to the fire.
For the population, the ordeal began. Hundreds of people, perhaps thousands, will try to survive in the zone controlled by the French. Some stay in the woods. Others are sheltered in neighboring villages by friends. War crimes, which leave many French legionnaires indifferent. Look at their films from the time. Confident in their righteousness after the ambush on their comrades, many approve of the repression. Ugo Ramacciotti himself does not object. The SS's cleanup operations were horrific, he writes. But these are the necessities of war, and I hope the region will now be calmer. In their fight against the partisans, the French are now assisted by local collaborators. At least one per village. They point out the families of partisans.
In our village, there was a traitor. He was a traitor. He betrayed people.
He was a policeman. Without the traitors, the war could have ended sooner.
What did you do with the traitors?
Us, the partisans, we killed the traitors. What else could we do? We had no choice. What else could we do? The country had to be liberated.
We are at the end of 1942. A general radicalization. While the Allies land in North Africa, in Stalingrad, over 200,000 German soldiers, aided by Romanian, Italian, Hungarian, and Croatian troops, faced the Red Army. The LVF does not participate in the battle. Considered by the Germans as average quality soldiers, the French remain stationed in Belarus, 1,500 kilometers further west. Like the Russian, Ukrainian, or Baltic volunteers, they will continue to hunt partisans in the forests. But this time with new rules. On December 16, 1942, the German High Command adopts a directive for unit commanders. It states that all means will now be used against women and children, as long as, so they say, it leads to success. In plain terms, the entire population is a target, whether linked to the partisans or not. Does this information reach them? Ramacciotti is worried about something else entirely. The absence of letters from his family.
It's 4:20 p.m. Moutier films me with my camera, smoking my pipe. The news isn't great. I sent my letter number 28 to Anne this morning. But what's going on? If Anne were sick, someone would write to me in her place, right?
On the surface, he still believes. My confidence in victory is unshakable, he writes. In reality, he is full of doubt. One fact intrigues him about the continuation of their mission. The officers order them to no longer live in the same houses as the villagers.
The civilians hosting us are forced to move elsewhere. The legionnaires are unhappy about kicking them out of their homes. What to do?
Already a year in Russia. Still no leave. An endless routine exile. Behind the false cheer, his notebooks are filled with accounts of sexual abuses committed by French legionnaires, including officers against civilians. The men are at their breaking point, writes Ramacciotti. This legion is cursed. On Christmas Eve, he gets drunk with his comrades. May 1943 be the year of our victory, he declares to the group on December 31st, It will be the year of infamy. For on January 6, 1943, 6 months after his arrival in Belarus, medic Ramacciotti must participate in an expedition against villages suspected of rebellion. Stated objective: to free French prisoners held by the Partisans. In reality, his battalion commander wants to make an impact and terrorize the population, as the SS did 2 months earlier. By applying the new rules. A rapid cavalry unit, called the Shock Troop, was formed for the occasion. After some skirmishes with partisans in the forest, the column comes within sight of the small village of Sitch. He brought his camera.
I feel an indescribable anguish. This village will be put to fire and sword. The men have orders to shoot anyone they encounter, regardless of age or gender. These people are not responsible. And there are children.
As usual, they attack the village with mortar shells, but this time, they will storm all the houses without distinction and set them on fire one after another, whether they belong to partisans or not. Ramacciotti takes a few nighttime shots, then horrified stops his camera. These other images were filmed by German soldiers during identical massacres. Beatings, torture, murders, rapes.
The French were particularly cruel. They beat more people than the Germans.
People were terrified of the French in charge of reprisals. We called them the Punishers, the Assassins.
They raped women.
My father went to Sitch to see, and he saw the people killed. He saw their charred bodies in the street.
They threw the children into the well, along with the grandmothers.
Dad saw how they pulled the bodies of young girls from the well. He saw all that. He came home with a fever. He said he couldn't bear it. It was unbearable to see. Everything was in ashes. There was nothing left. The children aren't responsible. What are they guilty of? Why did they kill and burn the children?
After the terrifying night, Ugo Ramacciotti resumes filming from afar. Another village set ablaze by the Shock Troop. Chernevici.
From this quiet village, death has made its ghastly prey. A legionnaire tells me he witnessed unspeakable acts against an old man. They killed, pillaged, raped, to satisfy their vile instincts.
The residents were locked in the house. They killed them. They piled their bodies on a table. Among these corpses was that of my grandmother and my aunt. My aunt was 12 years old. She was still alive. lying on top of the bodies on my grandmother. And she was screaming, she was crying. It's there, next to that tree. The house was there. They completely burned the house. And her, they burned her alive. Here's that stone. That's where they were burned. Three days later, the survivors gathered here and they found my aunt's leg, not charred. The leg was still in its boot. What do I feel? Pain and pity for my loved ones who died for nothing.
Back at his garrison village, Ramacciotti recounts the events to his comrades. He protests to one of the leaders, Warrant Officer Barbara, and writes in his diary.
I am outraged. Barbara admits to having gunned down with his soldiers a considerable number of men, women, and children. But he hides behind the orders received. I don't hide my contempt and say that among the cavalry there are genuine bandits.
For a few days, this protest puts Ramacciotti in a difficult position. Informed of this, Commander Simoni, head of the 1st Battalion, opposes his promotion to the rank of corporal. But he is not punished and leaves it at that. What happens after the Sitch massacre? It's hard to know. The next documented massacre takes place 4 months later, on May 16, 1943. In this village, Kotovo, in Belarus, over 600 villages and 9,000 hamlets were burned and massacred by Hitler's forces. But how many by the French? The accounts of several legionnaires, like that of Eric Labat, describe routine acts.
We swept in like a hurricane. The residents knew upon seeing us what awaited them. Merciless with frozen faces, we silently performed the few necessary gestures. A tour of the barn, a handful of straw, a struck match, and a kick to the first flames. After burning the village, we collapsed the wells with dynamite and destroyed the silos so the potatoes would be unfit for consumption.
Bitter, Ugo Ramacciotti puts away his camera for good. And in February 1943, when the Battle of Stalingrad is lost, he stops writing.
Last night, I had a dream that filled me with anguish. I was in Paris. Stray bullets were whistling past my ears. The civilians, overjoyed, were wandering the streets, and I felt the Germans retreating before the Anglo-Gaullist advance. I was deeply moved by the collapse of my socialist and national dreams. I lamented not being able to share in the collective joy, and I felt looming around me the terribly unjust reproach of having betrayed France.
In this premonitory dream, the contradictions of a man. In the name of his personal morality, he never stopped criticizing his comrades. He denounced their crimes. Yet he remains in the LVF.
He was full of contradictions. In 3 years of war, he came back on leave twice. He came to see me in Brittany, and I heard my father say several times that he admired two kinds of people. Those who chose de Gaulle and those who chose the LVF. And in 1944, when people linked to the FFI tried to persuade him to change sides, offered him to join them, he refused, saying, "You don't abandon your comrades." I remember that phrase very well, said in front of me. You don't abandon your comrades. Yet he knew it was over and that he was going to lose.
A tragedy, where the end is written in advance, where one walks like a sleepwalker toward their own downfall. Ugo Ramaccioti's story ends in July 1944. Wounded on the front, he dies in a hospital in East Prussia, leaving behind his wife, Anne, and his son, Hugues, age 10. As an adult, his son, Hugues, would become a soldier like him. He would marry the daughter of a French resistance fighter who died in deportation in Nazi camps.
My father died. He was 36 years old. And often, I have a dream. I see him as if he were my son, and I scold him. I tell him, "What the hell did you go do there?"
The story of the LVF ends in September 1944. After the liberation of Paris, when over 1,000 of its members joined the Charlemagne Division, at the request of Himmler, the head of the SS, they find their veterans of collaboration, including many French militiamen who fled to Germany. Until the collapse of the Third Reich in April 1945, they fight in Poland, then in Germany. A few dozen of them are even among the last defenders of Berlin. Captured by the Russians, most are held in captivity in the Soviet Union, then in France, before being amnestied in the 1950s. To this day, no French study has been conducted in Belarus on the atrocities of the LVF. Forgotten massacres, overlooked by historians, and still burning in the hearts of Belarusians.